we've saved you a seat. Welcome to Train Station at 8, a place to gather with friends and talk about music for a while, particularly video game music. This is going to be episode 15, and today we are going to be talking about just one song. We're doing things a little differently than we normally do it here. We're going to just be discussing a single song and see if we can maintain a decent conversation for long enough. So this may be a shorter episode because this is experimental for us, but hey, we think it'll be interesting and you hope you will too. Joining us for that today is, of course, my co-host and brother, Stephen. Hello, Stephen.
Hello, it's me, your co-host and brother.
Yeah, that's very descriptive.
Yeah.
And original of you to say.
Thanks.
Also joining me today are two other podcasting brothers who we've had on here before, Will and Karl. Hello, guys. How are you doing?
Howdy.
Doing great. Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. And you guys all run your own music video game podcast, right?
Yes, that's correct.
That's true.
Super
Marcato Bros.
But
you almost did that in unison.
That was good. And Brian, you almost said that.
We only practiced it 10 times. So we almost got it.
It's all Skype's fault at this point.
Everything is pretty difficult. I think I've discovered that.
But yeah, that is a podcast I listen to quite often and really love. So it's really awesome having you all back.
Yeah, thanks for having us back. We had a great time the first time we were here talking about Mario music, so glad to be back.
Yes, and we're not straying too far from that in today's episode. We are going to be talking about Donkey Kong music for our single song here. It's going to be, what was the name of the song, Stephen?
Island Swing from Donkey Kong Country.
Exactly.
Pretty much the most famous song of the entire Donkey Kong series.
Yes.
Yeah, it's probably the song that popped into your head when I said Donkey Kong music.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Unless it was the do-do-do-do-do-do. Maybe that.
I was just thinking Donkey Konga. There's no more musical Donkey Kong came out there.
Yeah. Good point.
Yes, we're going to be spending today talking about all the small things, the entire episode.
I would say Island Swing is definitely the most remixed and rehashed song from the series by far.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's a good point. Will, you were saying before you were a little worried when you first saw our email saying we were going to spin the episode on one song.
Yeah, well, when we got the email, I got it in the morning. I woke up and I was reading through it, and then I got to the part where you're like, we're going to do an episode on one song. And I was really nervous because I'm like, how can we, maintain a conversation on one track, even if it's the best track? So I silently in my head as I'm reading, I'm sort of making this list of it can't be this, it can't be that. It has to be something of substantial importance to video games. It has to be a good song,
right.
And it has to be kind of long and diverse enough to kind of dissect it in parts. And this isn't even one that I had really thought of, but as soon as I read it, I'm like, oh my gosh,
perfect.
What a perfect choice.
Well, because, and we'll get into it, but, it's divided in these little movements. It's kind of a rare piece of music for this era where it's, it's constructed from completely separate movements, and it's pretty cool.
Well, it definitely is a rare piece of music that is accurate.
Rare. Very good.
Rare. I just got that.
I'm hilarious, man.
That's great.
Yeah, so...
I don't blame you at all, Will. Brian was the one pushing for this idea, and I was just as nervous as you were. I'm like, is this going to be like a 15-minute episode? I don't know.
I think you were the one who came up with this song in particular, though, and it fit really well, Stephen. So, good job on that.
Thank you.
But yeah, I wanted to do it just because we've been doing a lot of similar episodes in Train Station for a while, doing series discussion like we did with Mario, we did that for Kirby, we did that for Star Fox, and so on. Mm-hmm. And I just thought it would be fun to do something that a lot of our conversations we've had on the show have been fun when they go more in depth. So I thought choosing a topic that was itself really in depth and focused in would be fun to do, even if it is just a shorter episode. I definitely wanted to try something different.
Yeah, and that's one of the big reasons I wanted to bring you guys on, because even if we're probably missing a lot of stuff in this music that you can pick up on because you're composers in your own right. Just listening to the Marcato Bros show, that's kind of what you do. You really look critically at this music, and you're able to kind of pick apart the more interesting bits. So,
yeah, I think the whole idea behind our podcast is to just sit down and record the conversations we would normally have just nerding out about video game music in our own life, which we do all the time. So I think that's why we have so much fun, coming on this kind of a show.
Yeah. Absolutely. That was definitely similar to our incentive for this show, because we're like, what do we talk about all the time on our own time, and what are we really passionate about? And it's like, well, video game music. The main difference is we just don't know as much about it, but hey, we still have fun. That's why we bring people on. So before we get on to the song we've really built up here, Island Swing, I'm going to go ahead and go with our first question here, which is, what have you all been listening to? Will, we'll start with you.
Okay, so, well, in the video game music spectrum, I've been really, really listening to a lot of Metroid music.
Really?
I'm working on a big kind of comprehensive project where I'm making original compositions in the style of a multitude of titles in the series. So I have some 8-bit tracks that sound like Metroid. I have some stuff that sounds like Super Metroid, and I'm going to be working on stuff that sounds kind of like the Prime era stuff. But anyway, so I've been the Metroid series, unlike something like Mario, where when you think about like the best music, where it just has like one really truly great composer, Metroid has a multitude of composers. So kind of listening to their music and their style and the kind of ambient nature of the Metroid music is something that kind of challenges me compositionally. So I've been really getting into a lot of Metroid and appreciating that stuff. And also the music of The Last of Us, which is much more minimal as well, and that's just another one of my favorite games. Other than video game music, I really, really, really love the new Michael Jackson album. I've just been playing that on loop. I have the CD. I play it in my car like every day. It just picks me up no matter what. But my two favorite
I love the
tracks,
whenever you tell someone, "Oh, I'm listening to the new Michael Jackson album," their face. I like to watch their face.
I'm
because,
sorry, I don't have
wait
one
a second.
I'm like, are we recording this in the 80s?
Yeah, the album is called Escape, and it consists of unreleased tracks that they kind of are, sprucing up to make them modern and fresh. It's actually a really great album.
Yeah, my two favorite are the single, which is Love Never Felt So Good, and then there's this other track called Lovin' You, and they're both so old school, and I mean, knowingly so. They were written in an older era. I think the Love Never Felt So Good was recorded in between Off the Wall and Thriller. So there's a lot of like older era Jackson stuff, and there's just some classic songs in there, and it's a really fun album with some great production. So I guess, yeah, that's sort of the type of stuff that I've been listening to lately.
That's pretty neat.
Yeah, that's actually really cool that they had that stuff to release, because like when he died and all that, it's kind of like, well, we're never going to get any more of the music from that artist.
I know,
and the idea that
so
more of it
sad.
exists is kind of fascinating in its
Sort
own way.
of from the literary world, it kind of reminds me of when J.R.R. Tolkien passed away, his son continued compiling all the old writings and completing them and publishing them and such. So
Get more
Right.
echoes from that person's mind, so that's really cool. What about you, Carl?
I guess starting off with video game stuff, we recently sat down and talked with Darren Korb for our podcast, and so I've been listening to a lot of his music. He did the most recent, he works at Supergiant, so
Yes.
Bastion was his first thing, and then Transistor most recently. So I've been listening to, obviously a lot of that music to prepare for that episode and to edit that together. But I would have listened to it anyway because I just love those soundtracks so much.
What did you think of Transistor? I got about maybe the third of the way through, and I want to go back to it. What do you think of the soundtrack?
I absolutely love it, and it's possible that I may like it slightly more than Bastion. I haven't fully decided yet, but I really am a big fan of. It's a little bit darker. It's a little bit more electronic. There's a lot of tension that he creates with, and he talks about this in our interview, with kind of having multiple meters, time signatures kind of going on at once to give some tension. But there's some really beautiful, subtle moments on there too. It's just a very diverse soundtrack. So yeah. Listening to that,
I don't know if you saw, but Kevin Van Ord for GameSpot, who we've actually had on the podcast before, recently wrote an article on the music of Transistor and talked with Darren Korb about it. So you might want to check that out. It's actually really good.
Oh, that's
very
neat. Yeah, go ahead, Will.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I was just saying you guys should, listeners as well, should check out, I think when this comes out, our interview with Darren and our whole episode talking about his music will come out the upcoming Monday from when this episode is released.
That's
great.
awesome.
Yeah.
So trying to think other game stuff. There's a soundtrack called Major Magnet, which I think it's like an iPhone game or something. The only reason I know about it is because there's this YouTube musician, T. Lopez, that I'm a big fan of, and it's a game that he did the music for. So I've been just kind of listening to that. It's kind of a weird one that most people don't know. But I would say other than game music stuff, I've been really into the new Hiromi album. I don't know if you guys know.
There's a new Hiromi album?
Yeah. So for anyone who doesn't know, Hiromi is a phenomenal jazz pianist, a Japanese jazz pianist. She's super, super cute and quirky and just has a really energetic presence. It's just really fun to go down a wormhole of Hiromi YouTube videos if you ever, have an entire night that you'll be
she's
bored.
awesome.
But yeah, so Hiromi is, I saw her in Minneapolis a couple years ago. It's one of my favorite shows I've ever been to. But she has a new album with her trio of Anthony Jackson and Simon Phillips. And Simon Phillips is the drummer for like Toto and like Jeff Beck, and he did some stuff with The Who and Tears for Fears, all kinds of stuff. So yeah, that's the new album that I've really been digging.
That's really cool. Hey,
that sounds great.
Here's a question. Do you guys ever watch any anime of any sort?
I like
no, the last
Miyazaki, but I don't watch any I don't watch a lot of Japanese anime
I'm with Will.
Yeah. I'm mostly the same way. There are only a couple I've enjoyed in my life. One of them, and I don't want to get too off topic, but it's called Kids on the Slope. And the conceit is essentially, I think it takes place in the 60s.
Mm-hmm.
And it's at first it seems like, oh, another anime about high school kids. I want to watch this. But the whole theme is jazz. And it's the characters learning to appreciate and play the music. And
that's awesome.
They adapt real songs from real musicians, and no joke, was like my introductory to enjoying jazz music.
That sounds cool.
Awesome.
I would be interested to see what someone like you would think of Hiromi, someone who's not super into jazz, because I think one reason that I really got into her, to be quite honest, is she has a lot of video game influence. Early on in some of her albums, she does a lot of really fun, like crazy synth stuff that kind of sounds like video game music. And as far as like compositionally, she really likes Japanese pop and like folk music. So there's a lot of kind of other influences, not just jazz, in her music. So I think I don't know, it's something that I think a lot of people that enjoy video game music would probably enjoy Hiromi.
I like the idea of making an anime about jazz music, because those feel like two almost completely opposite cultures coming together.
It's really interesting.
But at the same time, jazz is other than America, Japan is one of the places where jazz is so popular. So that makes sense.
But of course, jazz music never influences video games. I mean, we can definitely roll that out. Sure.
No, that's a ridiculous thought. Get that off this show, Steven.
Okay.
Yeah, it's funny. A lot of like jazz cats, like really heavy bands, like Japan is like the place that they'll go to. That I feel like there's always fans in Japan of like almost any jazz group. They can always go to Japan and find a fan base.
Just another reason to love Japan, I suppose. Yeah. So anything else, Karl?
Trying to think. No, I mean, just like listening to music every week to prepare for the podcast. Yeah. Trying to think of what else. We're doing a Mega Man 2 episode, so I was just kind of getting all that stuff ready and just kind of getting it all, organized. So I, was listening a little bit to that, but that's all kinds of stuff.
Are you going to listen through all of the remixes of Wiley's theme?
No, we're just going to do an episode where we just literally play every track from Mega Man 2 and just really focus on it.
That's really cool.
Oh, good.
Yeah, I guess you could get through that. I mean, how many tracks does that game have?
In earnest, I would say about 16 actual pieces of music, if you don't count the little 5-second jingles.
Like those little transitions and stuff like that.
I'd say about 15 or 16, maybe.
That makes sense. And what about you, Steven?
Well, I'm trying to remember. What I've actually been doing is I've been going through my iTunes library, and anything that I have not already rated.
Oh, yeah.
I'm just obsessively rating everything 1 to 5 stars. So that's been kind of keeping me busy. It's been very random. But I recently went through, and started listening to some of Jake Kaufman's soundtrack for...
Oh, wow. That's another wormhole.
Have you ever done an episode on him?
No, but we're gonna probably have him on the podcast.
Yeah, we wanna save an episode for when we can have him. But he's so awesome. Yeah, we play. His
he's one of our
time.
absolute favorites. As far as just like people that are active nowadays that are combining old school with new school. We're huge fans.
Yeah,
of him,
the thing that always impresses me most about him, and beyond just the quality of all of his music, is the variety he manages. He can go from one style and then make another soundtrack that you would never guess it's the same person just because he's doing a completely different genre.
See, what I love about this is we're able to we're kind of cheating. We're not just talking about one song. We're able to talk about all kinds of different stuff.
There you go.
This is like the warm up. If you're going to compare it to jazz, it's where we're all just tuning our instruments and little ditties and stuff. And Brian, you have a very good point that Jake knows how to hone in on a specific, like concept or style and just nail it.
Mm-hmm.
But the soundtrack I've been listening to, he takes two styles and nails them both at the same time.
And what are those?
And we talked about this last week with Jason Napolitano, but I haven't been listening to a ton, but I did buy the Boot Hill Heroes soundtrack, which is directly merging like the classic Square RPGs, the Final Fantasies of the SNES, with a cheesy Western. All of the Western tropes.
Yeah, Jason did talk about that.
Yes, and it's...
Wonder if it sounds anything like Wild Arms in that case. Because that kind of reminds me of Wild Arms, your description right there.
I barely know any of Wild Arms music, but...
It's pretty much that, what you just said.
Yeah. It is very similar, but Jake definitely was able to use the library of SNES sounds to great effect. Like, it sounds super convincing.
We asked Jason
that's cool.
this, and now that we have a second pair of ears, is there a lot of whistling?
Oh yeah.
I haven't run across a lot personally.
Okay.
But I haven't finished the album.
Because that's what Wild Arms means to me, is all the whistling. Yeah.
I would be shocked, nay, dismayed, if there was no whistling in this album.
Wait, does he only use SNES sounds?
Well, I don't know I don't know the details of
Do they
how
all sound like they'd be played on a SNES?
Essentially.
Mix it with other elements. Okay.
I'm curious to see how he does that, because Karl and
it's
I
not
have
very
done it
common.
a couple times. Yeah, the way we do it is we actually since when you get the SBC files, you can separate each individual channel, just record audio from a song and then rip specific notes and then put them into a sample player and pitch them up and down. And so it's really tedious. For my Metroid project, I ripped to 200 or something different samples. But it's the only way that Karl and I have found to make it convincing. I know they have sound fonts or something, but I'm curious if he was able to program something, or I don't know how.
Yeah, when you're
done
with that really tedious process, it does sound very convincing. So I'd be curious to know what he did.
Yeah,
magic. I'm
probably
convinced that
magic.
He just has magic.
Probably the Jake Kaufman magic that oozes out of his eyeballs or whatever. But
I love that because a lot of his stuff has been very kind of FM based. It reminds me more of Genesis style stuff. So I really that he's doing.
He's done
SNES.
a lot of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
he's done stuff that sounds just like Sega arcade music.
He has a whole album of stuff in that style. Yeah, he's done a lot of that. So Steven, what else have you been listening to?
What else have I been listening to? Oddly enough, I can't seem to stop listening to the Sims 3 soundtrack.
Yeah, you mentioned that.
And I feel like I've talked about it.
You mentioned that it's making you obsessed with playing The Sims 3.
It really is. I don't have time to play The Sims 3 right now, but I might have to anyway. It's really good music. It just puts me in a good mood every time. I'm probably going to try to see if we can get, what's his name? I think it's Steve Jablonski or something.
We should probably figure out how to pronounce his name before we get him on the show.
Probably. We never do that, though. I'd like to get him on the show. And I realized recently that he's not going to be doing The Sims 4, which kind of makes me sad.
Oh, no. Who is?
Koji Kondo, actually.
Yeah, he's
Koji Kondo and
branching
Brendan
out a
Sir
little
are going to be
bit.
teaming up to bring us The Sims 4.
They're bringing Soyo Oka back from original SimCity.
Soyo Oka, she did the SNES version of SimCity.
Oh, wouldn't that be a crazy reveal? That's that would be
She also
bringing
did-
David Wise back for a new Donkey Kong
No, but
game. That would
she's
Yeah.
legendary.
Oh, wait,
She
that
also
happened.
did,
yes, it
she also did All Stars and Super Mario Kart.
Oh, nice.
She's great.
Yeah, indeed. All right, Steven, anything else?
Nothing else of note. It's all so scattered, I can't really remember.
Well, I want to get on to the main topic here, so I will not take very long in what I've been listening to. I just want to point out one album, but partially because our last guest had a hand in it being made, as in he put it all together. I'm listening to Prescription for Sleep. And what that basically is Jason Napolitano went to, I forget the name of the artist now, but he's the guy who arranged the Snake Eater theme for Metal Gear Solid 3 and played the saxophone for it. And he went to him and said, okay, I have a bunch of different video game songs. Could you make versions of these songs basically lullaby or calming or good to go to sleep to? And and the guy basically did a bunch of covers of different video game songs with piano and saxophone, very calming and relaxing. So I've been listening to that as I go to sleep. He does something from Nier, Dire Dire Docks from Super Mario 64, and The Maiden in Black from Demon Souls, and a lot of different other songs. So I've been really enjoying that. It's a very, very good album.
That's great. I still haven't listened to it yet, but I have to ask you, has it helped you go to sleep yet?
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. Awesome. I'm glad to hear that it works.
It does work. And I listen to music all the time when going to sleep, so it's like the perfect album for me. Relevant to this episode, he also did Aquatic Ambience from Donkey Kong Country.
That's
like
of course.
Perfect.
Yeah, that has to be on there.
Perfect choice.
That's cool.
All right, so moving on to Donkey Kong, I'm going to ask a question here about the piece, and that is going to be a pretty simple question. So,
before we begin, we invite you listeners to listen to the song in full so you know what we're talking about. So here is Island Swing from Donkey Kong Country.
what stands out to you most about the piece?
I think my problem here is there are a lot of things that stand out about it.
Well, that's why I put the word most in there.
For me, I guess I would say just sort of the integration of the very primal, I guess, ape-like rhythmic drive of it. Like the thing that stands out
I think the
to me-
percussion.
I have the
the
percussion
kinda-
written down. Yep, that was my answer.
the swelling nature of it. Like I just like how it grows. It starts off with
There you
just the
go.
percussion, the dun, 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 and then slowly the chords fade in, and so it's
And
a
then you
really
have
long
the
time before we get.
bongos.
Yeah, it's a really long time before we actually get into the da 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 da
Yeah.
da 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 da,
Everyone's
which is like.
spinning up.
Yeah, and what I like about that is that melody is just so kind of fun, jazzy, David Wise awesomeness, but it doesn't feel foreign in that kind of jungly environment because he took so long kind of establishing the groove and everything and really immersing you in that kind of percussive sound.
Yeah, that's actually
Also,
a
I
good
think-
point because it
Yeah.
like got you into this beat of like, oh, I'm in a jungle. And it's like, hey, this jungle kind of has a beat to it. And then he puts one layer of percussion and another layer of percussion and a third layer of percussion until you're like getting into the beat of the jungle, and you're so into realizing that that's actually kind of a groovy sound that the melody on top of that fits when he puts it in there.
Well, I think
Right.
the reason why it fits on so many levels is because not only beginning when it's just the drums, that obviously that sounds like a jungle, that sounds great, it reminds us of, primal apes, but when the jazz kind of big band feel comes in there, the reason why I think that is so on the nose is because that's something like jungle jazz music, like something like, do you guys know the song Sing Sing Sing?
Mm-hmm.
It's
Yeah.
a famous jazz song that starts off with. It's a similar kind of a drum beat, and that's kind of called a jungle beat in jazz music. So I think that Dave obviously was kind of influenced by pieces like that.
That's a good point.
And that's kind of why he was going for that jazz or early kind of almost Dixieland, like really early jazz kind of a sound there. So that's why I think that those two sections are both
That's
so
a great
fitting for the drum.
observation. I never thought about it like that, but I think you're right. And I think one of my favorite things about it is that the swung feel. I mean, I know it has swing in the name, but when you start off, because again, you don't start off with any kind of semblance of jazz elements really, because like the song that Karl was mentioning, those are more kind of like tom fills, where this sort of gives you more of like an African drum kind of feeling. But what I like about it, it's swung, so it's not da 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 da. It's
what's
has
crazy is
swing
that-
to it, but with those kind of jungly elements.
But like, what's interesting is the whole song isn't swung though. So after that section, and I actually think one thing that I always am surprised with is how brief the how brief
Yeah.
that section is. It's like 20 seconds of that, and then all of a sudden it stops and it goes into a straight feel. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is like a completely different song, but I love it because the environment in the game like changes, like the weather changes and the sun starts setting, and it really it works so well for the game, and I think it showcases the true power of the SNES because we have like these really powerful visuals and tight mechanics, but then we have not only impressively sounding, technical music, but also the fact that it can have these different movements and sections, I think is just a great kind of standout introduction into that, not only that game, but that series.
Yeah, actually,
Yeah, I'd say the short answer, what stands out most is the drums, I would say.
Yep, I had that written down as well, the percussion. So a point earlier I was going to make about like the transition is I think something else that helps it go from just this tribal sound to the jazz sound is they bring in that bass line. Which kind of like is the in-between.
That bridges the
of those
gap,
two.
yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But, yep, I had
It's
the
so
percussion.
exciting when you hear that bass line in
Yes,
there.
it's like, okay, now it's getting real. I had the percussion down. Steven, what did you have down for your answer?
well, mine was the pacing, which we kind of already went over, which is how it slowly builds up. I really like the fact that you guys caught on to the whole. It starts you out just in a jungle. It even has some birds or something in the background.
Yeah, he loves all those different like ambient sound effects as percussive elements in his music. I always find that funny, like bird chirping, or like in the song in Donkey Kong Country 2, where like
the mines.
factory, where he uses all the different sounds of like the metal working to create the groove. I think that's kind of playful. It reminds me of kind of like the comedic nature of Rare games, where it's like a lot of the things about it are kind of tongue in cheek and almost like a joke and played for laughs. I really love that.
Yeah,
but then
Grant
the
Kirkhope.
advantage of incorporating the sound effects is that then nothing's going to cut out and you're in complete control.
Yeah.
And you're never going to have to worry about, oh, there's a sound effect now, so the melody is going to cut out. Like, he's in control of having the sound effects kind of incorporated into the music the whole time.
I loved Rusty Bucket Bay from Banjo-Kazooie. He'd used a lot of like the boat whistles and stuff like that in between the melody. So it's a nice history for Rare to use those sound effects in their actual compositions.
Sure.
I mean, Grant Kirkhope taking on the whole, hey, we almost went through an episode without saying the words Grant Kirkhope. He definitely took on that mantle of implementing sound effects into the beginning and ends and even middles of some of his compositions.
Singing in Click
Yeah, you had like the spooky sound effects in Mad Monster Mansion, and but yeah, it was the pacing that stood out to me. Very rarely will a platformer from this genre or this era takes so much time to slowly introduce you to the music, to to the point where you could be in the middle of it and be like, how the heck did I get here? Like, I wasn't paying attention. I was just tapping along with my foot. But
Yeah.
it's a really, really fun piece.
All right, so question number 3. What are some of this piece's biggest weaknesses? I think this is going to be a tougher one.
Yeah, I had a hard time.
This is a really hard question. The only way I can really answer this is, I think the thing about this piece is the weakness is also the strength. So for me, in some ways, the nature of having these separate movements tied together, it's difficult.
Yep.
Because it's not traditional, it's not the form that you hear a lot of classic video game music. I think personally that's one of the things that makes this piece stand out. But I do think that for some players, the fact that it's the first level, it's possible they might kind of be, what's going on here? Why is it changing so drastically?
Well, I think it was kind of a ballsy
I don't have that
move.
opinion, but
Yeah, I think it's a ballsy move because you typically, like, for great video game melodies, they have the luxury of just repeating endlessly forever and ever. And so by kind of switching sections, you don't get to hear that melody as many times, so it really has to stand on its own merits and doesn't have the luxury of repetition.
So
one thing I did want to mention before we move on is Will and I had the luxury of, what I think I'm so happy we're here today, is we had the luxury to interview Dave Wise a few months ago for our podcast.
Fantastic. So
we got kind of some inside scoop of this piece and kind of the origins of Donkey Kong Country, which I would love to share with you guys today. One of the things that's so unique about this Jungle Swing, Island Swing song is that he had no idea he was making this when he was just working on a demo, almost like a tech demo that
show to Nintendo to show to Nintendo work on Donkey Kong Country.
And he was working on a few different options, and he literally made 3 different songs, and that's what this song is.
Yeah, so I think he probably made different parts, just a percussion one, and then probably the big band one, and then the completely different thing.
So anyway, those 3 songs are like that because those are the 3 options he did. And someone at Rare said, "Oh, why don't you just put them all together?" And he literally did that, and that's why it is. Which in some ways is a little bit, it kind of loses a little bit of the mystique, but it's kind of cool at the same time to know that's why it is the way it is.
So there's stories like that, if you look at film music, the story is that when John Williams was asked to work on the music for Raiders of the Lost Ark, he came to Steven Spielberg with 2 ideas. The first one being and the second idea he came to him was
and Spielberg was like, why don't you just do both of them?
Put them together? So I like stories like that where, a creator comes in with these ideas thinking that they're very intrinsically separate, and sometimes it takes someone from the outside to say, you know what, these are great, put them together, and then you'd have something even better.
But the more I think about it, I don't think this piece does really have a weakness, so I can't really answer this question.
I feel like the closest weakness I can find is, again, also a strength, because I love the way the SNES sounds. I think it's just brilliant how he was able to bend it this far, almost to its breaking point. But unlike, let's say, Super Mario World, I feel like Super Mario World just sounds best on an SNES. I feel like if you could play it with live instruments, you could play it with an orchestra, whatever you feel like, it could be enhanced in certain ways, but I just want to hear it through the SNES ultimately.
Right.
See, I feel that same way about Donkey Kong Country music.
I feel like I love it this way, but it almost seems like it's just begging to be using the actual instruments.
Well, I see what you're saying, Stephen, and I think the thing is, for majority of the soundtrack, I would argue that I think the SNES versions are just the complete definitive version. But this song is very going for like those 3 distinct specific sounds, and I think obviously, like if you had. I don't think there's ever been a completely faithful remix where it's actually gone for what the intention of the song is. But I bet if something like that existed, I would probably prefer that. And what I think is kind of a missed opportunity is in both Country Returns and Tropical Freeze, they did remixes of this, and none of them featured like real instruments or really kind of captured the style of it. Understandably, because they wanted to kind of make it a remix, but...
And also, I mean, when anyone remixes this song, it's all about the dun-dun-dun-dun, dun-dun-dun-dun. That's what they focus on, you know? They don't focus as much on the build-up or the other section. The more I was thinking about, I guess I can think of a little weakness, how the song comes back to the A section again is a little bit awkward. You know how it goes? It has the drum build up, it has the jazz part, then it has that other kind of ambient straight part.
Yep.
At the end of that, leading back into the beginning again, I feel like that's a little bit awkward.
Well, yeah, because it's just switching back between the straight and swung fields.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for my
and it's kind of funny knowing now, like literally that he just put those three together.
Yeah.
Like he didn't probably spend a lot it
makes a lot more
transition.
sense.
What were you saying, Brian?
Yeah. I was saying for the weakness I put down, actually, for this question, I had just put sudden transitions, because they're the same thing. And I thought that was the only problem with it is I was wondering if, like, did they play at different parts of the level suddenly or something? Because, like, when it goes from that first song to the second, it kind of cuts in the middle almost of a note to the new percussion.
Right.
And then
that's a good point. Yeah, and I guess Steven, I really like what you said, where it's like I think the difference is that with Donkey Kong Country, the samples are so convincing that for the first time you can really tell what instruments he's trying to evoke. Where with Mario World and a lot of early SNES games, it's like it still was sample based the way that the SNES sound chip hardware works, but they didn't really convey real instruments as much as just kind of their own new timbres. So when you listen to something like Mario World, it's just such a distinct sound, and there aren't really any real instruments that you could point to that could really replace it and feel completely organic.
Like, I think you could hear like steel drums in a couple of the songs.
Yeah, for some of the stuff, but
when
a lot of
steel drums,
the intro to a level of music like it, bum bum ba-dum ba-dum. It's like
a brass
what would that be played with? It's played with an SNES. That's what it's played with.
Exactly. So because it's played with a saxophone and that sort of thing, you can say, okay,
totally
that doesn't sound like a real saxophone.
Totally a drum. So. Yeah. So it's hardly a weakness. It's extremely impressive they were able to do that, but I'm stretching here.
Right.
Yeah, we're all in agreement that the song itself is excellent.
And that's why I wanted to include this question, because I know we're going to have many lovely things to say about the song, but I did want to give it, its fair critical overview. So,
I respect.
Next question.
Okay. Question number 4. What do you think about the instrumentation of this piece? And we went over this a little bit just now with, how it sounds, but what do you think of what he chose? And
I think when you talk about instrumentation for the SNES, you have to talk about the sample choices, how he's manipulating the samples, and the sound, the fidelity of them. I think Donkey Kong Country, the whole series, just blows me away with how good those samples sound. One thing that Dave talked about is he kind of used a technique called single cycle
wave samples,
where he would take samples of a very, very small length, and he would use those in a way where it could take up almost no space, but he was able to have more control than a sample that was longer. Not a lot of that in this piece, but one thing I will say is just I don't know how he kind of adds drum sounds on top of each other and stacks different drum sounds together. It sounds so lush, and it just sounds so impressive, especially for 1994. I would have just been blown away at that time.
So as someone who's worked with SNES sampling and that sort of thing before, how would you describe the process really as opposed to composing for other platforms and that sort of thing?
Well, I guess for the thing that I would say is, first of all, Karl and I, we don't have experience actually working with the hardware. The way that we've approached it has been kind of trying to look at what the guys did who worked on the SNES and try to mimic that once we are able to achieve those sounds, because we're not working under the same limitations. We're trying to artificially recreate those limitations. But just some things that I've noticed, I guess if you compare it to a chip-based sound set like the Genesis or like the SNES or like most game consoles, is that the samples play such a big part in it, in that each game can have a completely distinct set of sounds, and that no two games theoretically could sound the same if you're using different samples, or even if you're using some of the same ones. So I think the thing that I like about the SNES is it's somehow able to still feel old school and nostalgic with the way that it compresses those samples, but at the same time it's able to feel kind of fresh and new in the context of game music. And I think it's an interesting example where it's there are limitations, but at the same time it really feels like the first console where the music doesn't feel limited in a sense, and it doesn't seem like they're having to overcome a lot of limitations.
Yeah. Another interesting thing that I was thinking about when I saw this question about instrumentation, is I think that Dave made some really good choices with what instruments he was trying to convey, because in the jazz section, obviously, you get a lot of good brass and woodwind sounds. You get some nice clarinet, and that's really Dixieland music. It's really all about the clarinet and the brass. So that is definitely very good choices, I would say, for that section. I also like how in the final kind of more ambient section, it's a little bit more like pan flute and a little more kind of ethnic sounds, which I, again, thought was just on the nose.
To me, it fits like the jungle vibe, and it's fun knowing that there were originally 3 pieces of music, but putting it all together, to me, is just like, it's almost 3 different approaches at a jungle aesthetic, and by having all of them together, to me, it shows how diverse the Donkey Kong series can be. Whether this was intentional or not, I don't know, but it shows how diverse the Donkey Kong series can be, both as far as the gameplay and the music, because it has its playful, fun take on jungle music, but it's still very much kind of like Karl was saying with like Sing Sing Sing, where it does feel like jungle stuff. You have the purely percussion-driven section, which definitely feels like almost the most immediate jungle vibe. And then when you do get those more kind of ethnic sounding instruments, I think that also gives another connotation of jungles, and I like combining it all together because it's a very comprehensive. To me, it's almost like a thesis statement of like what the game is and what the music can be, and really like a final push, because it came out fairly late in the console's lifespan. So it's just saying, look at what we can do with this thing, and there's a lot of confidence to it, which I really admire.
It's sometimes hard to remember coming from the future as we do, but back then, the visuals and the music were just mind-blowing. Like, there was almost nothing else like it. And this whole song, being in 3 movements especially, combined with that first level that, like you said, would change throughout it, the weather, it would get stormy. It's like this big establishing shot for this whole video game. Like, this is what you have in store for you. You're going to have levels and levels and levels of this stuff.
Yeah.
Enjoy.
Well, because this was the tech demo. This jungle level was this came out of the tech demo, so this is definitely the most impressive part of the game. If you're going to show someone the game, this first level is just amazing to watch.
I mean, as a kid, I
still have memories of it from when I was like super young. It was one of the first video games I saw, and it just felt so rich. And
I remember it was like the first. It was the first platformer that, to me, really explored the idea of all the different multiple pathways that could still exist in a linear experience. It sort of expanded upon what happens in the old Mario games, like when you go in a vine or go down a pipe and you're in a bonus area. But to me, especially this first level, there's just so many secrets.
Yes.
When you get the rhino, you can bust through all those different walls. There's different paths where you take atop the trees where you can shoot the barrel into the sky. It's really like it's like, it feels like a thesis statement of like showing you just a taste of every kind of statement that you're going to get throughout the experience. But I love it.
I totally agree.
And sort of one final note for the instrumentation. I just want to give him a high five for that piano.
I was going to say the exact same thing.
Yeah.
I mean, man, that was so cool.
Yeah, his sampling is so incredible to me, because it's like he said that he kind of made his own samples, which is in and of itself cool, but how great they hold up and how they're just better than anything anyone else is doing. And also, he's authentic to the part, it's a great kind of jazz, piano, bluesy line, but that mixed with, like, I agree with you, a lot of SNES piano sounds, like even in Mario World has some of it, and it's just like, it doesn't necessarily really sound like a piano, or like, I've been listening to a lot of the Super Metroid stuff. There's piano sounds, but it doesn't really necessarily sound like a piano, but you're so right. Like when you hear it in Donkey Kong Country, it's so immediately, that's a piano. And also the part is so authentic, it doesn't feel like digital or inputted. Right. Exactly. It really feels like it has the soul of a performer's, touch.
It's not just how the piano sounds, it's how it's used. Exactly. It's played in that, like, off-the-cuff little riff sort of way.
For me, I'm glad Stephen, you brought up the piano, because that's the first moment. It's a very striking moment, because the piece builds up and takes its time. There are times when I'm listening to it where I'm like, I just really wanted to get to that main section. So when I hear that dun 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 dun, when I hear that piano come in, that like just makes me smile every time.
Yeah. Now it's
it's
getting
starting.
real.
It's going into it. Yeah, it is the transitionary element between kind of the build up and the melody. So
And the build up
It does
is
a
so
great
long
job.
because what I love, even after that, then the piano starts doing the chords, and then dun 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 dun. Like I love how it builds up.
indeed. So question number 5. What does this piece say about its placement in the game? And I think what we meant with this question mostly was like, how does it relate to the actual level, and what is it conveying in terms of inside the game?
Well, we definitely established the whole demo reel establishing shot kind of aspect.
That's what I had down. Yeah, I said it set the tone for really the whole game going forward.
And perhaps something that we haven't mentioned thus far is that when Rare was given this game as their project, they essentially had to set some new rules for this very flimsy character that has, until this point, basically just been a big, dumb Popeye-style villain.
Not much character there, before.
I think one thing they really set with the tone was combining this idea of, it's a weird thing, Donkey Kong is like not entirely an ape and not entirely a human. You know, his level of intelligence and his level of sophistication.
Yes.
I mean, he's a monkey that wears a tie. If you think about that, it's really deep. But
Well, to me,
really,
he's like a cartoon ape in the style that Mickey Mouse is a mouse.
Exactly.
I mean, it's like he embodies
Yeah.
the physical characteristics of it to some degree, but he's humanoid and he's larger than life and personified.
Exactly.
And what I love is like his role in this game is since he's the protagonist, he's almost defined in like the way that Mickey is, where he's much more humanoid, where in the original Donkey Kong, his purpose in the story was to be the antagonist. So he was, he
He's
was
more
more
of
like
a
a
monster.
Popeye villain.
Well,
he was just
I
portrayed
think
as like a monster,
In
which
Donkey Kong, it was probably more like King Kong.
Exactly.
That's the vibe I
Yeah.
got.
Oh, yeah.
You know,
I mean,
he was holding
Universal
the
sued
princess.
them because they were doing
Right.
Donkey Kong. So, and you know, there's Diddy as well, who has a lot more personality and stuff than you would have thought from before. But I think something the music kind of establishes in that direction is it combines, you know, that tribal, kind of just jungle, primal kind of feel, and then it has the more sophisticated jazz elements on top of it. And that's kind of the whole series now. It's like, yes, he's still a monster. Yes, it's still kind of just a tribal, feel, but then it's also more of a sophisticated feel. You have the whole Kong
I
family
think-
who have this, more
What
civilized.
I think is interesting about this piece is Dave didn't know when he was writing it because, like I said, he was just making music to go along with a tech demo. He really was not thinking that much when he made this piece, which is so surprising. And we
know.
specifically asked him, when you wrote this, were you like really happy? Like, oh, I have something special? And he's like, no, it was just another piece that I did.
Exactly.
So, which blows me away. But one thing I think is so interesting about this piece is it really is kind of like a building block of like, this is what Donkey Kong Country music kind of is. It has everything in this piece that makes great Donkey Kong. It has like really fun, jazzy, kind of swanky stuff. It has more ambient stuff. It really has all the elements of Donkey Kong Country music.
Well, and I think it embodies the kind of concept that I love, where it's like, even if the creator doesn't intend something, you know, the story or the emotions that are conveyed by the product that you have that's unchangeable really says something beyond what just they intended it to say. And to me, it's such a great introduction to Rare's take on the franchise, and also David Wise's kind of staple to the series, because it's also great, like the title screen, how it starts off obviously with the original and goes into the more remix version. But since this is the first level theme we hear, it kind of does a similar concept where it's like, it starts off with just the groove to really kind of feel like, you know, this is something new. This isn't your father's Donkey Kong. You know, this is a much more kind of realistic, you know, jungle-based kind of thing. But then as it slowly ramps up, we really get into the fun and kind of energy of it. And it's a great introduction to the diversity of David Wise, but also just sort of his own personal musical touch. And since that's probably the most iconic melody, arguably, of the entire series, I think it's a wonderful introduction to it. And it, like, by that point, I feel like anyone playing the game would be sold on, I really like what they're doing here. Because it's also been far enough, you've been playing enough of the game where just the mechanics and the level design has already probably won you over a little bit. So by the time that theme comes in, it's like you're smiling and you're right there with the big gorilla.
Yeah.
It's the perfect first level theme.
Yep.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And that's a good point I'd forgotten about when you said, like, out with the old and in with the new. I forgot how blatantly they had done that in the intro movie for Donkey Country, where they had, Cranky listening to his old...
NES. And what was funny about that is they got the NES sound. They were still using samples. So Dave ripped actual, made samples out of the NES.
Oh, that's so cool.
Instruments, which is so interesting. Yeah.
So, Steven, did you have anything for this?
I don't even think so. I think we covered so much of that before.
All right.
Yeah.
So question number 6, how does this piece compare to other songs or games in the series?
Well, I think the first thing that popped into my head once I wrote this question down was the fact that later on the Donkey Kong Country music got a lot more electronic, kind of industrial almost.
And in what I think is interesting, especially in the third game, I don't know if you guys realize this, some of it got pretty darn tragic.
Yeah.
Like, there's some really, sad sounding music that Evelyn Fisher composed for the third game. It's great stuff, but it's very kind of experimental and, sophisticated.
And that's, a completely different spirit than this song is presenting. And yet, I think it's hardly disputable that this is kind of the soul of the Donkey Kong franchise.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's
Well, I think this is definitely what Nintendo wants to really hold up. And I also, probably Retro Studios is this is sort of the energy that we want to remember for Donkey Kong Country. But I think some of the things, if I look at the series, my favorite stuff, really my favorite soundtrack is probably the second one. All Dave Wise, all wonderful music. And it really does get more kind of serious. And it's where we get introduced to those kind of electronic elements.
And those are some of my favorite moments
swing
of the series.
Yeah,
to be honest.
and I really love that stuff. But I think it was a great choice, and whether it was a choice or not, but it's really good to have the introduction be a little bit more digestible and more kind of, I guess, traditional video game music, and the fact that you have this really catchy, fun, jazzy melody, which is a staple of the 8-bit era. And Dave Wise working on a lot of classic games in the 8-bit era as well. So it's sort of that nice transition into this new style. But yeah, I guess the one thing that's different about this than the other music would be that it doesn't have a lot of the kind of things that I think of in the majority of the music in the series.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I guess if I were to compare this to other songs and games, it's definitely more famous than any other song, followed pretty closely by Aquatic Ambience, obviously. I would say that it's longer than almost any. Aquatic Ambience is even longer, though. But yeah, this and Aquatic Ambience are definitely a lot longer than some of the other pieces in this series. That's another thing. It takes its time. It builds up emotions more than probably. Again, Aquatic Ambience is another one that does that kind of a thing too. But yeah, it's something about that riff. It's just it's a classic video game theme that. It's just one of the absolute classics.
And I think it did have, it had some big shoes to fill, because while the original Donkey Kong didn't have much music, the music that was there was great. And then,
it was actually composed by Miyamoto.
But in the NES game, when they added music for the title screen, that might be my personal favorite Donkey Kong theme. I mean, that's one of the best pieces of video game music, in my opinion. It's just so perfect and beautiful. And what I love is we talked about how Donkey Kong, the original game, is a nod to King Kong and the 1930s style. And the music, that song captures that 30s-esque quality, which is something that I really love. And so while there wasn't a lot of music in the original Donkey Kong, I think Dave had some big shoes to fill. So I think when we're talking about context in the Donkey Kong Country, how it's different, but also, it's a complete departure from anything we'd really heard in the series before. So I think obviously there were like big shoes to fill, and this first track does such a great job of showcasing what he can and will do.
Yeah, so Will, did the title theme from the original Donkey Kong, I believe that was composed by Yukio Kaneoka, the person who invented the NES sound chip.
Yeah, that's what I think.
I'm pretty sure he's the gentleman who did that. So yeah, it's so cool how Dave started off with that theme, and then it's almost like saying, okay, yeah, like you said, this is not your father's Donkey Kong. This is a new generation here.
They couldn't have been more direct with that messaging. But I actually think
Yeah, the boombox.
it's kind of a shame how the music evolved organically for the Donkey Kong Country series, slowly getting more serious and more electronic, etc. But then, it was basically a reboot on the Nintendo 64. And honestly,
It got goofy. It got a little goofy again with Grant.
it got goofy, and I feel like it was sort of, I wasn't given its proper due. After all,
I can see that. I can see what you're saying there.
I mean, it
I don't
almost felt
completely
like-
disagree with
I
that.
was about to say it felt like Banjo-Kazooie reject music.
Yeah.
One of the
And it
songs
was.
was literally a Banjo-Kazooie reject
Yeah,
song.
it definitely doesn't have an incredible, unique identity from Banjo-Kazooie. It sounds similar.
Well, I mean, obviously, yeah, the elephant in the room is the same composer. Grant Kirkhope does have a very signature compositional style that it's kind of unavoidable. But the thing is, I mean, he's such a different composer than Dave Wise. Like, Dave is like, I feel much more slow and really likes build-ups. He doesn't like giving you something immediately. He likes building a groove. He likes techno music. Grant really likes poppy, immediate, catchy, in-your-face melodies.
Right.
And
He loves
I don't think
melodies.
that's something that Dave really likes as much. I think it just happens to be something he's also incredibly gifted at. But just even this song, how great of a melody that is, the way that he paces it just indicates to me that that's not necessarily his first priority. And so I think those are some of the differences. And so it's like, it doesn't necessarily help in the Donkey Kong series that the last time we heard it in Donkey Kong Country 3 was probably the most serious and, like Carl was saying, the most tragic example. And now on the 64, we have sort of that boom, 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 boom.
I mean, you boot
really
up
kind
the
of
cart,
fun.
and it's going,
Here we go.
oh, okay.
That's
Yeah.
a whole other can of worms. But I think Grant Kirkhope is capable of putting more originality into his soundtracks than he did for Donkey Kong 64. If you look
Well, I mean,
for
one thing I do want to defend Mr. Kirkhope is, I don't know if you guys know, but he told the story when we interviewed him on our podcast, is that was an era when he was overworked.
Yeah.
He was working
Yeah,
on
I was
three soundtracks simultaneously and was going back and forth.
He was
and
having to do
just-
like Perfect Dark, that, and also like Banjo-Kazooie
Banjo
or
2,
Banjo-Tooie.
Banjo 2,
Man.
something like that. And he was so overworked, and I don't think most people would say, "Oh man, that sounds like a Rush soundtrack." I mean, Perfect
No.
Dark is so good.
Oh, yeah.
It's a
Banjo
great
2 is
soundtrack.
great.
And I like
And there's
DK64. It's just it's not exactly anything like Donkey Kong Country,
Yeah.
but I don't know. There's one of those map themes. Like the first map theme is such a kick-ass song. It's just so melodic, and to me it fits at home in more the world of Nintendo music, where it's like Donkey Kong Country is so novel and unique, and it's just such a departure from really anything in video game music up to that point, where DK64 definitely plays it safe a little bit more, but it has
Yeah.
some awesome melodies, and I mean some of the best music of that console
Steven, that
generation.
overworld
I would be
theme,
curious.
That was originally written for Dream, right?
Are we,
Or the
are we
Banjo-Kazooie
talking about
prototype?
64s?
Donkey Kong 64? I thought. Are we talking that or Donkey Kong Country?
64. I
Yeah,
believe.
the overworld theme for 64. That was originally written for the Banjo-Kazooie
Yeah.
prototype, right?
Yeah,
The Dream.
it was in.
Yep.
It was pretty much the exact same song lifted and put into 64, which maybe it's because he was overworked, and that was
Yeah.
a really useful.
Yeah, I would be really curious to hear what Grant would have done if he only was working on that game
Yeah.
and he took more time,
And see,
Because-
which he honestly didn't have, to listen to maybe more of Dave's music and try to do something that feels slightly more like it was carrying the torch
Right.
of
I
Dave's
think the
stuff.
thing that we might have to give him credit for is that his job wasn't necessarily to sound like Dave Wise or to sound like Donkey Kong Country. I think he was just kind of looking at it like, here's the game I'm making. I'm trying to fit the style. And to me, when I look at that game, I think the music absolutely fits kind of the aesthetic of the game. And I think my overall problem with the game is that it's not enough like Donkey
it's
Kong Country.
incredibly boring.
Yeah,
is my
I was
problem.
about to
It's
say,
too much kind of like cliche video game
Yeah.
going around fetching all these different items, and there's no intensity. There's no
Yeah,
you can't
what's
have the
interesting-
rhythm to it because there's no rhythm to the game. It's
It felt
so
like you know,
non.
Yeah, like
Yeah, adapting the game.
nothing
to
about the
genre
game
was-
feels like Donkey Kong
Mhm.
to me. Nothing.
And I
Which
feel
I
like
think
even
that's the problem.
even
with
that
it.
could have
You
been.
do collect bananas.
Well, that there are bananas in it. Got you there.
I feel like you should only collect bananas if it's on your way to the end of the level in a side scroller. Like, you shouldn't have to go out of your way to look for
But only
them.
collect the bananas that are the color of your character, because otherwise you cannot get those
Oh my
bananas.
gosh! Red
They
bananas,
will-
blue bananas, yellow bananas.
Yeah, there was a lot of legwork in that game. Good
That
call.
game is just bananas. folks.
Oh!
Ah.
Yep.
But yeah, I really do feel that like Kurt Cope could have done something a lot better than what he put forward if he was given the time. And it's not so much that I need it to sound exactly like Donkey Kong Country, but it didn't present an identity of its own either.
The great point is the game didn't present an identity of its own.
So
the soundtrack kind of is what the game deserved in a weird way.
Yeah.
That's not to say either is bad in my opinion.
I mean, to me, the soundtrack is worlds ahead of what the game presents. I mean, there's a lot of tracks in that game that are really memorable and super catchy. I think, again, it was a tough act to follow. The excuse of like him working on all the things, but also it was such a different game mechanically. I think he was just trying to respond to that. But I do agree, like it feels so much like Banjo-Kazooie, but something that I wonder, if Banjo-Kazooie didn't exist, we would probably give DK64 more slack in a lot of regards. But I think part of the problem is since Banjo-Kazooie already existed,
and it's
almost
better.
like, Donkey Kong 64 didn't need to exist, both the game and the soundtrack. It really just felt like it was like a Banjo-Kazooie game in a Donkey Kong coat of paint.
Do you guys, Brian, Steven, do you guys know how well did DK64 sell?
That's a good question.
I don't know off the top of my head.
I don't know. I mean, it would have been interesting if they just made it. It was made between Banjo-Kazooie and Banjo-Tooie? Yeah, that's what I thought.
Yeah.
Because
I think it came out a very similar time to 2. I think they both came out around 2000. If I'm not mistaken.
It felt like that genre was just blowing up at that point.
Yeah.
And so they
it was kind of a filler project, it felt like, in many ways. Just because they needed a Donkey Kong game for the 64. But
exactly. So, moving on here to question number 7. We're almost at the end here. What are some existing or potential remixes of this piece that you find interesting?
There's so many. I don't know where to start.
I love going to OC Remix for my remixing needs, but I honestly think they haven't really they haven't found a remix that truly impresses me or brings something brand new and exciting
for this song.
For this particular song.
Yeah,
I couldn't agree with you more, Steven.
Yeah, I totally agree. You know what I find interesting is this song is maybe remixed more than almost any video game song. I mean, maybe Mario or, Dr. Wily or something, but like it's remixed so much in games and by, amateur artists, but I don't think I've heard one that I love. Like people get parts of it pretty good, but it's interesting. There's definitely not like a definitive remix that I'm familiar with. I kind of liked what Kenji in the Retro Crew did in Donkey Kong Country Returns. I think there's some pretty cool.
To me, that's like it's just kind of like taking. It really is faithful to it, which is what I like. It's basically just like this song, but with slightly more modern instruments, which so far is probably my favorite rendition. But
it doesn't blow me away.
Yeah, even in Tropical Freeze, once you have Dave back on the wheel as the composer, it's like it's a remix and it just incorporates that melody, but I mean, that new version of it, I definitely don't like as much as the SNES one. And it does fall into that territory of some of the virtual instruments sound a little bit fake. And so I'm a little bit desensitized by this point to some of that stuff.
What do you guys think of
did with it?
Cool, definitely cool, but still like nothing that like blew me away. And it's not. I don't know if it's the definitive. I don't know if there is a definitive remix. What do you guys think of the Smash Brothers remix?
I was going to bring that one up, and mine was going to be Smash Bros for N64 because it's
that's
so
a pretty good
similar, but it's just a little bit more. The sampling is a little bit clearer.
That might be the definitive remix.
Yeah, that works because the N64 is also such an iconic sound. Yeah. It still sounds a little bit old school though. I think that's very fun.
And this keeps the build up and everything that makes the song what it is.
I actually attribute a lot of this song's recognizable success to Super Smash Bros. Because there are so many players who just got together with their friends and they're like, oh man, I remember that song back from the SNES, and it just reminded everyone of it all over.
And also, there's probably people now in 2014, maybe when they play, the new Smash Bros. Oh, I remember that song from Smash Brothers for 64. The first time I ever heard it.
Yeah. I mean, it's true. The first time I ever heard the infamous DK rap was, I think, it was in Melee. I remember being like, what the hell is this? This is awful.
I think is interesting. As long as you're talking about this.
Composers for Smash Bros. What's wrong with them?
Yeah, I thought they made it for the game. I'm like, how embarrassing.
That's terrible.
Work into this.
There was two famous songs that the first time I heard them was Smash Brothers. The Kirby song, the chase. The first time I ever heard that was actually for the 64 Smash Brothers. And the first time, because I never played Kirby Superstar. And the first time I heard the famous Zelda 2 Temple song was in Smash Brothers.
Absolutely. I'm sure that's for a lot of people.
Yeah, I agree.
So I'm like, why don't they play a Zelda song on this stage? That's weird.
Yeah, yeah.
Why are they playing Why are they playing like a James Bond mini boss theme? Yeah, that's weird.
Yeah. Okay. To go back to an old point, it looks like Donkey Kong 64 sold around 4.5 million.
Okay.
Can we compare that to like Banjo-Kazooie?
I could try to look that up. Sure.
Oh, okay. Just curious.
You want to compare it to GTA 5? Have those numbers?
No, I don't.
Not really.
Because we got to adjust for inflation there.
For copies, Carl, you have to adjust for inflation of how many copies were sold.
Was that copies?
That was copies.
Yeah, I guess I still say it's not fair because there's way more people that play video games now than were in 2000.
Wikipedia has it as 3.7, and they have Banjo-Tooie at 3. I don't see Banjo-Kazooie in the list. For reference, Mario 64 was around 11.5.
Yeah, you have to adjust for inflation of gamers. Yes. Gamer inflation.
Well, and now we see why they made DK64. It obviously did sell pretty well. And I think they probably wanted to integrate the mechanics that they did in Banjo-Kazooie into something that maybe more people would play. Yeah. But I think we can agree it wasn't the best.
Yeah, Banjo-Kazooie is down at 2 million, so it sold a lot better.
Interesting.
That's crazy.
I'm sad about that now because I think Banjo-Kazooie is a lot better.
Me too.
Do you have?
Well, we find that stuff all over the place.
Do you have the number for GTA 5?
16 million.
Oh, Jesus.
Yeah.
Yeah, something that's so sad to me, and talking about retro, my favorite game and Carl's favorite game ever is Metroid Prime for the GameCube. I think fantastic. It's a perfect game. I play it like every year. It's just one of my favorites.
Do you own it on the Wii collection?
Yeah, I have every version of it.
Good for you. Excellent.
But the thing is, that game, the entire trilogy, all those games combined, sold less than Donkey Kong Country Returns, which is an amazing game. But to me, it's so sad that it's like that Returns, just this kind of fun, spin-off of the Donkey Kong Country games, sells better than like 3 of the most immersive, atmospheric games. It's a sad to me that's like sometimes
I wonder if
doesn't necessarily sell better.
And
I wonder if that's the reason we haven't heard anything from that famous Metroid series.
It can be tough to sell a Metroid game. There's no lies about that. It has a hard time being a straight shooter.
And I get sad about it every year when they don't announce it at E3.
Yeah.
I think it's because it's more popular. Anytime when a Nintendo series is like almost exclusively popular in America, that's a problem. Oh, yes. I don't think it does well in Japan.
That's a shame. Because, you wonder why things like Assassin's Creed come out with, Assassin's Creed every single year, and building the name seems to be one of the biggest parts that then gets games to sell.
Yep.
And so people have learned to harness that until the name gets tarnished, and then they, build up another one, Watch Dogs. So we'll see how that goes for them.
That's why I like DK Island Swing. Oh wait, where did we?
that is why I like.
Well, we
DK
had to
Island
fill
Swing.
about an hour.
It's that great remix of Watch Dogs.
But I actually, to jump back to the remix thing, I think I've decided one of the remixes I would really, really like to hear someone.
What is that?
I would like a really sort of muted, distorted guitar to take the spotlight for the main melody of Island Swing. And then everything else being with a really good deep bass and then maybe some drums. And all of the build-up is done with the one bass and the drums. And then that electric guitar coming in and being almost like really slow it down, really kind of explore each of those notes as much as possible. I think that'd be. I
gotta say, Stephen, you have such a distinct, specific vision. I think you need to work on this remix.
Oh man, but I can't. Brian, play the guitar for me. I'll instruct you.
I can work with you on this remix.
Good luck, Brian, because he sounds like he's going to be very particular about the way your guitar tone is.
Why did you play that for 3.5 beats? What's wrong with you?
No, I want it more muted.
Unfortunately, I don't know any musical terms, so I'm like, it needs to be more like emotional. Like the get the thing right. The thing.
You know, like cry.
I love that
thing.
though. No, I like not speaking in musical terms, especially like Carl and I have a little experience working with like game developers, but sometimes it's difficult when they use musical terms if they don't actually know what they're talking about.
Yeah,
then it's really
just
confusing.
I prefer don't ever use musical terms if you
Guys,
don't know.
need
Just
to
talk
understand-
about
Like, you
emotion.
need the guitar to be in falsetto for
Yeah.
most of the. Most of
Yeah, emotional terms, everybody understands that. So
That's
talk
actually
about
a
emotions.
really good point, and something we had to be careful of on this podcast because, you know, as we get more into music, we get a cursory knowledge of some terms, so we have to be really careful that we don't use them when we don't know what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Also,
Sure.
You definitely have an extensive knowledge of vocabulary because cursory is a wonderful, wonderful word in your repertoire.
Thank you. Anyway, that covers all our questions, so I'm going to go ahead and move up here to the last one, which is the most important one of this whole podcast. What have you been working on?
Well, I have this remix that I really want to get done.
I hear a falsetto guitar in my head.
Karl and Will, you guys were talking about a Indiegogo campaign you just started.
Yeah, we have a pretty exciting summer, pretty creative summer ahead of us here. Our brother Marty, who is the third Marcato Bro, he actually wrote an original musical for Minnesota Fringe Fest, which is a festival where we're from, Minnesota. It takes place in early August.
Yeah, the musical is called Fire Flower, and what it is, it's sort of, if you take the kind of imaginative world of Super Mario Brothers or just classic video games, very inspired by that as far as just kind of the story and the imagery, but it's done through the lens of like a golden era 1930s style musical, something like The Wizard of Oz.
Wizard of Oz, yeah.
Yeah, and it's a great combination because you get a lot of sort of 80s, 90s video game retro nostalgia, but almost done in a more timeless package, and it's very kind of on the nose about being.
Yeah, so
like
I mean, if
Super Mario
anyone's
Brothers.
interested, I would just Google Fire Flower musical on either Google or
Sure,
Facebook,
that's what I
and you
did.
can find some info. We have a Indiegogo page up now if anyone's interested in contributing.
Yeah, maybe
have
we
a pretty
could put
small.
the link in some description somewhere.
Mhm.
But yeah, on
Yes,
Indiegogo,
yes.
I think it's called Fire Flower, an original musical comedy is the wording.
So,
Yeah.
so we're both in it. Will and I both have acting parts. I play one of the. Think of it like a Goomba character, like a scarecrow, like the first friend he meets, and Will plays the bad guy whose name is Browser. So we're kind of working on that. As far as our podcast, if this comes out Saturday, then in a couple days when you're listening to this, on Monday we have our Darren Korb episode coming out where we interview the wonderful composer. So we've been, working on that.
Amazing.
Yeah, Will has that really awesome Metroid project he said earlier. He's been working on that.
I'm
I have a
super
project,
excited about that.
Will can talk a little bit about it, but yeah, I have a project I'm doing. I'm working on remixing the music of the Swordcraft story series for the Game Boy Advance, which is not a lot of people actually know, but it's some of my favorite video game music. So I'm doing kind of modern remixes of that. We'll see how much I end up doing.
Swordcraft. Man, I haven't heard that name in a long time.
So yeah, that's what I'm working on.
That's cool. Okay, awesome. So, tell us a little bit about the Metroid thing, though, because I like Metroid a lot.
Yeah, so do I. And
This
like
is going to be awesome, guys.
Prime being my favorite game, I've always just been super engaged in the games. It's probably my favorite video game series, just in that I play through every single title probably annually. It's just like a thing that I do because I love them so much, and I love the character of Samus. And the music, it's just such an integral part of my childhood. I just can't separate it from the experience. But I really wanted to take an objective lens and see what was kind of going on, whether I would like it or dislike it or see what was novel there. And, I've just come out having so much more appreciation for composers like Hirokazu Tanaka, Manako Hamano, and almost most importantly, Kenji Yamamoto. All of those individuals just brought such a unique style to the series. And the thing that impresses me most is the way that they're able to deal with ambience and dissonance in a way that's still catchy. Because people can sing and hum these tunes from Metroid. They're still very memorable and catchy, yet they're also able to be ambient. And sometimes they're able to be really dissonant. Like, I've been listening to a lot of like Metroid Fusion. Like, it's able to be very complex. Like, there's a lot of tracks like da 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 like very complicated, weird stuff going on, but like it's really memorable and it works and it's able to be scary.
Well,
so I've been just trying to capture what I think is great about kind of the emotions and the things that I'm able to point to in the music that I see again and again, and then implement them the most authentically that I can. So like in the NES stuff, I'm really trying to go for like a hip Tanaka sound. And then in Super Metroid, I don't want it to sound like that at all. I really want it to sound more like the emotions of that game. And when I get to Prime, I'm probably going to have a little bit more of like a modern techno-y influence and working with the synths, but it's still in the works.
From my perspective, what I'm excited for is to have an album, a comprehensive album that literally kind of goes from generation to generation and tries to model every single one. I don't know. I'm not aware of anyone else that's tried something like that. So I'm excited for this from Will. I think the name of it is Child of the Chozo. Is
yes,
that right, Will?
That's right.
Cool. It's a great name. Yeah, because it seems
looking
to me
forward
like a
to
lot
that.
of people might go through a series but stick with a single style for that series.
Yeah. Well, which we've done.
Yeah, because it's really it's hard to do this, especially in a series where you're looking at like a bunch of different composers. It's like it's really challenging to be kind of operating in those three different worlds. And the thing that I'm most excited about is sort of the last track is going to be I'm going to really try to work on this, but it's going to be a medley of all of them. And so it's going to be a big like 20 track album, but the last track is going to be an orchestral medley. Maybe if you ever heard the Super Metroid orchestral medley years ago, but it's like an 8-minute medley of all the best themes from Super Metroid, and it's orchestral and it's fantastic. And so I kind of wanted to do something like that where once you're done with this album, then you have this orchestral medley, which will hopefully sound really nice, which will have themes from like the NES style, the Super Nintendo style, and the more modern kind of GameCube era style, and all put them in the same kind of environment. I'm hoping to kind of create the feeling where it's like when I listen to medleys of video game music, you know, it feels iconic and I'm drawing back on nostalgia, but I'm curious to see if I can kind of create those feelings all within the context of a single album. So it's kind of ambitious, but I'm curious to see if it works.
We'll see if he ever finishes it, folks.
Yeah, good luck with that.
Wow, how far along?
That sounds amazing and extremely ambitious. I actually have one question about it before we end the show.
Sure.
In some of you, the past albums you guys have put out, you'll try to emulate, almost as if you're creating a fictional soundtrack to a real soundtrack to a fictional game.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right? So are you doing the same thing here, or is it more of an homage? In
for
general?
this one, what I'm going for is because it's following the styles, I can't really think of it as like a fictional game. What I'm trying to do more here is I'm actually being more specific to tracks. So I'm looking at like what's great about Kraid's theme. Okay, well, it's this 3/4 thing. It's kind of dissonant. So I'm kind of looking and starting a little bit more from like what's good about this song and how can I make something that
and
feels
then maybe
like
what's
that song.
good about that generation, focusing on that generation, then moving on to the next one, and in the course of an album.
Yeah, I'm trying to have a balance of like songs that definitely feel inspired by one track, and also ones that are just kind of an amalgam of Metroid-y goodness. So hopefully you have some things where it's like, oh yes, this feels right, and some things where it's like, oh, this is cool and new. But I'm also trying to balance, I want it to be a good listen. I don't want to have anything that's like too dissonant, because some of the Metroid stuff is able to get away with a lot of that because it's not an audio only experience. It's background game. So
you'll be happy to know that last night I actually started Prime 2 for the 5th time. I've never beaten Prime 2. I've started it so many times and just eventually stopped. So, I started again. So I'm hoping this time I'll actually beat it.
It's great, and it has some excellent music.
Really hard in that game. I think they even toned them down in the re-release.
They toned them down in the Wii version. Carl, are you doing the Wii version? Like I said?
Yeah, that's what I'm doing.
Okay, you have a chance this time.
Yeah.
yeah, the Boost and Spider Ball Guardian are pretty damn
right. That is
especially that Boost Guardian. I have like this weird psychological complex with those games where like I love them so much as a kid, but I got so immersed that even to this day,
I used to get so mad at you because I was I used to play Prime back in 2002, and Will was a very, very little kid, and he would run out of the room when I got low energy when I was about to die, and I got so mad because he's not supporting me when I need him.
I was so afraid because it's scary. I was so afraid of like when you die in that game.
Yeah.
And it's crazy. Still to this day, when I got Prime 3 for the first time, at this point, I'm old enough I should be able to handle this. The first time I was playing that one Maganar boss in the first seed place, and I got like energy low, and I paused the game, and I was thinking like, should I mute the TV? And I was so nervous about the experience of dying. I just shut off the console. I'm just like, I'm gonna do this again later. I still can't handle dying in that game, which something about it is effective. But yeah, I remember playing that Boost Guardian was so scary because dying is awful.
And I remember.
But yeah, guys, Island Swing is a great track.
Yeah. Well, this is a little closer because we're asking what he worked on. He worked on Metroid. I can follow the train of thought this time.
Oh, right.
But,
Yeah.
That's a good point.
But I used to get really tense in Metroid Prime because how they do save points in that game.
Yeah. Oh
that's
my
what makes
God.
it so
Yeah.
scary.
And
It's
dying
not
is
just like-
traumatic. It's like
it's not just like, okay, I died. Now I'm going back to the beginning of this fight again. Like most modern shooters, it's like, whoa, I would have to go back a really long way. I do not want to die. And yes,
Well,
how
and
they
it's just-
handle it.
It's like the only game I've ever played with a completely consistent universal aesthetic throughout the entire experience. Like everything that you read, see, hear, do in the game is completely reinforced. So I think that's why it's the most immersive video game in my opinion. So it's like
every HUD element.
dying feels like dying, and it's so sudden, and like you hear her scream, and it's like you don't hear Samus do a lot of things because you kind of are her. So it's like, oh God, it frightens me. I used to have nightmares about that game.
Wow, yet it is still your favorite game.
It's absolutely my favorite.
Someday we will relate the tale of Andros from Star Fox.
Oh my God.
Traumatic
Talk about
reaction.
nightmares for me. That was my video game traumatic experience.
It's pretty the Polygon one from SNES.
Oh
yeah, that one. It was in 64.
The N64 with the monkey where he's like looking
Yes.
at. I was just like shooting his eyeballs.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I was not expecting it at all, and I was really close to the TV, and I was super young, and then that came out of nowhere, and it freaked me out.
That's
yeah. That was my.
So that's
video
another
game
thing we're
childhood
working on. Still trying to pay off the psychiatry bills for Brian. Get him a little bit of counseling.
Andros won't have his way with
the
me.
last thing, Carl,
That's
that
a
we
pretty
should-
enthralling.
Yeah. Yeah, Carl, the last thing that we should mention is
sure.
we were lucky enough to work on, there's this new remix album coming out by the guys over at shinesparker.net called Harmony of Heroes, which is actually it's remixing tunes that have been featured throughout the Smash Brothers series, and a bunch of different artists are working on this. Carl and I were asked to work on it by the creator, Darren. He's a great guy, and Carl and I got the opportunity to work on the track from Balloon Fight. You know, that and we did this really kind of cool like reggae kind of thing, and we used
with
a lot
all
of
real instruments. Yeah,
recorded instruments. So we had a lot of fun working on that. But I'm really excited to hear. I haven't really heard what the album sounds like because it's still in the process of getting mastered, but I think it's going to be cool because, you know, the Smash Brothers series, so many classic gaming legends, and also so much great music is featured.
So it's pretty much like any song that has ever been in any Smash Brothers game. So that's pretty much like every video game song.
Right.
You know what I mean? So it's crazy.
That sounds awesome. Okay, I will definitely look out for that.
Yeah, it's called Harmony
it'll
of
be-
Heroes. If you go on shinesparkers.net, the last project that they did like this was called Harmony of a Hunter,
Yeah,
which
I
was
love
actually
that album so much.
Metroid arrangement.
Yeah, you're
By the
probably going to
same-
like this a lot,
It's the
guys.
same dudes. It's going to be in
That's
a similar
so
style to
awesome.
Harmony of a Hunter. I remember
Yeah, so,
Congratulations
downloading
for
that a
being
long
on
time
that
ago.
compilation. That sounds so cool.
So I'll be curious to hear how our reggae balloon fight theme, you know, how that fits with the rest of the artists' work. So that should be fun to hear that.
Great. Well, that sounds like you guys have a ton going on right now. That's cool.
Pretty much.
I guess so. I've been feeling pretty lazy actually lately, but this just makes me feel less apathetic, I guess.
Yeah.
Well, that's just Will's problem. He always has to be doing something, which I share that. I need to be working on a project or else I'll feel just like miserable.
Yeah, I look at your guys' music library and I'm like, how did these guys get so much done? Good gosh.
We always try to counteract it. We're just like, okay, we're not going to do this much. Let's take a break this time. And then we take a week off and it's like, okay, let's get back to it.
Yep. Well, for this brotherly duo, we have kind of been toning back the project we've been making, actually, because we have a bunch in the works, but none of them are ready to go, and I just don't know if we have time to put them out. So unfortunately, we don't really have anything interesting to announce, but Train Station 8 is still plugging away, as is its parent site, Wales or Wales.
Nice.
And the falsetto guitar remix of Island.
Yeah, but that
actually
hasn't
am
been
going
officially
to do
announced
that.
yet.
But yeah, please.
Oh, sorry,
Carl,
that
keep
hasn't been
under
officially.
wraps.
The trailer hasn't been released yet. Sorry.
Keep an eye on our YouTube channel.
Yeah, we do.
So I think
have-
we just reached the 5-hour mark, just as a benchmark. I think we're halfway through the episode.
That's just for this question. Yeah, I think we.
Yeah, this has been actually all different
Yeah.
parts of one question. Now
Anyways,
to the
guys,
next
back
track
to
in the Donkey
Island
Kong
Swing.
Country song.
Oh, jeez, this is horrific.
Aquatic ambience.
What if we
Yes,
did this
man.
for every track in the game, and this was just one episode that's like 40 hours long?
That would actually be super interesting, but I just went over that thing where I didn't have enough time. Yeah, that's not a problem. Yeah, a couple things for Train Station 8. I want to remind everyone our new iTunes feed is up and running, so be sure to check that out. It's the
I
one
gotta
with-
get on that stuff.
Yes, it'll be the
I
one
had the
with-
old feed. I thought you guys just quit the show. I was
Oh
really
no!
sad.
Yes, we
I was worried about you guys.
Especially because you asked us to do an episode. I'm like, are they just waiting for us to
We're
do the next
ghosts.
episode?
we don't have anyone else to do episodes with. No, really. Yes,
Especially because we had to we didn't. I don't know if we canceled, but we kind of had to reschedule.
Yeah,
at some
Yeah,
point.
we had a lot of rocky problems, which I think most of the listeners were perfectly aware of, because we did have to cancel one week. But we're
Steve,
back!
you have the a message on that feed, right? Telling people to switch. Did you ever record that?
Yeah, it should have been there.
All right.
I'll
I'll make
make
sure that's up there. So like,
It should have been. Okay, I'll make sure it is.
It'll be
I think
the
I see it on the feed. I think I see it there where it talks about the switching of. There's a name in the feed where it talks about switching it.
Excellent.
Okay, that's good.
And it's in there. Yeah. So and if you're hearing this, you'll be on our new feed. But yeah. So check that out. Please leave us reviews if ever you want to. 5 stars, great. And let us know what you thought about this episode, because this is something different than what we normally do. So email us or whatever. You can get in contact with us at our website, which is walesorwales.com/trainstation8. Or just go to
Feel free to send all of your hate mail for Carl and myself at supermarcatobrothers@gmail.com.
I will do that. Thank you. I have so much hate mail.
You could also forward it to us, because we'd like to read it. It'd be fun.
Yeah. just make
CC. Yeah,
fun
I
of
would
us behind
CC
our
everybody on it.
Exactly.
Make sure we're all copied on the email.
Yeah.
So you can find us at walesorwales.com. You can email us at trainstation8@gmail.com. Check us out on Twitter, trainstation8. And yeah, we are a production of Wales or Wales. So for more shows like this with people like us, check that out. We're doing a lot
Are
of
whales whales?
Whales are whales.
Absolutely.
Oh, great.
Confirmed.
Yeah. We thought it was not clear enough.
I'm glad that the name isn't whales are fish, because that would be a lie.
Oh, there you go. Yeah.
We definitely
Because
discussed.
they're mammals.
Right.
They're not fish.
Right.
So
I'm-
I just wanted to. If I said anything today, I want to make sure that that's clear.
So you
Now we
guys are
just reached the 6-hour mark.
So that's actually what I like about the Wales or Wales name is, since I mention it on every episode, that ensures I'm going to say at least one true thing
Mhm.
every episode I record.
And that might be the only thing,
Yeah.
but that's okay.
Probably the only thing. So yeah, check us out there. Other shows like this, we are updating a few things there, so we'll hopefully have announcements in the future. And that will wrap it up. Thank you guys so much for coming. That was so much fun.
Sure thing.
Yeah, we had a
Thank you.
blast. Thanks for having us.
Steven, thank you for being my brother and coming again.
You're welcome. I had no control over one of those things.
And Will, thanks for being my brother and coming on with me.
You're welcome. Steven, thank you for being Brian's brother. No, I'm just
Oh, thank you for being Will's brother. All
yes,
right.
let's drag this out, by all means.
This is like Christmas Eve right now. Just
I
good night,
opened
good
this-
night, good night.
I opened this show saying it was going to be a shorter episode. I was so
Oh,
wrong.
I'm so sorry.
When you get 4 video game music nerds together, it's not going to be
Yeah.
short.
Apparently not. Even if they talk
especially
about one
two
song.
brother duos with all these stories of being frightened as a little child by video games.
Someone-
Anyway, thanks so much, guys, for having us.
Thank you.
Our
Thank you,
pleasure.
everyone, for listening. And, of course, most importantly, say goodbye to the monkey boy.